Thank you. So yeah, a lot of the things we talk about are big. We talk about infinity, we talk about artificial intelligence. And I curated this show that you're sitting in called Giant Steps, which is about making art on the moon. And we knew that it was going to be in March. And it seemed like a really opportune time to talk about outer space for a higher ed conversation. And we were really lucky to find Shay-na, aka CP, and Phil, because they have an idea that is a perfect fit for what we are after, and that is ideas that we don't really have complete answers to, ideas that are going to change our future, ideas that could happen in any part of the world. And part of what this exhibit is about making art on the moon. And one of our jurors, Erica Wagner, just had a lecture recently, and I think that the one thing that really stuck with me is that she was saying that she made the analogy between space travel and automobiles and airplanes. And when automobiles first came out, they were criticized for being an object of the wealthy, and airplanes first came out, and they were criticized as being things only for rich people. And I think that that's a big criticism of what space travel is now. And I think that what we are experiencing is this birth of a new generation of space travel. And it is much like the Wright brothers, it's much like Henry Ford, and that we are seeing the first taste of something that is going to change rapidly in our lives in the next 2 or 3 decades. So what Shay-na and what Phil are working on is something that is kind of one of those game changers that makes it more accessible to the everyday person. It's something that changes the way we engage with space. And it is called the Atlantis Project. And Phil's the founder, or originator of the Atlantis Project. And we are going to step away and let Shay-na do a presentation, and then we'll come back for a Q&A when Shay-na is done. But at the moment, we'd like to give the stage over to Shane Nichols and the Atlantis Project. Thank you.
Try to remember, as a child spinning around in a circle, and for the first time stopping and feeling the world still spin around you. And that realization that for as much as you thought you knew the world, you have a completely new perspective for the first time. So hopefully tonight, you'll have that feeling again. I'm just going to spin you guys around for a bit, and by the end of it, you'll have a new perspective on the world and what's possible. My name is Shay-na, and I work with the Atlantis Project. I want to thank Greg, Eileen, and Phil, and everyone putting together this event tonight. Great backdrop for the talk. So tonight I want to talk to you about what the Atlantis Project is, what space scrapers are, why we would want to build these habitats, where they would be, and how they would be possible. But before we get too deep into that, I would like to look at what space is present. Well, what we're doing in space right now, we have expandable space modules, we have space robots, we have reused stage 1 rockets, and we have 3D printed meteorites with meteorite dust. So we have really cool things. But another aspect is, I'm not sure if anyone's a Star Trek fan, or if anyone's seen any episode recently, but or Space Odyssey. Everyone is using tablets and iPads basically, and so we thought we would be communicating with other civilizations by the time we have a board that can do just about anything we want. And unfortunately, we're not there yet for some reason. And the fact is that for as interesting as our planet is and our lives are, we really seem to want to get off the Earth. We're like teenage children wanting emancipation, and we're trying to figure out rent. So why is it that we are not up yet? possible explanation. This is a pyramid of progress into space, right? And the schematics of it are very simple. The wider, more solid the base is, the higher up you can go into space, right? So at the bottom tier, we're doing pretty good. We have skyscrapers, we have air traffic. This is our thin world. The maximum we're going is about 50,000 feet. And I mean, we're doing very interestingly. We have skyscrapers like the Burj Khalifa in Abu Dhabi that actually needs environmental systems on the top floors. That's how high it is. And another interesting fact is we actually have, you can't see from here, we have 660,000 people up in the air at any given time through flight, which is really impressive. I mean, this is purely fossil fuel, thrusting more than 500,000 people through the skies constantly. So we're doing pretty good on that tier. Then we have space scraper tier, which is what we'll get deeper into right now. But just consider that this isn't quite in space yet. This is before the boundary of it, so we're still within the atmosphere of Earth, still within its protective shielding of certain space areas. Then we have orbital tourism and transportation. This is pre-orbital space. There are many different commercial companies developing into this area, and yet we still haven't quite developed that much. It's only now starting to take effect, and what they're trying to do is bring people like you and I up to past the Kármán line, feel weightlessness, and be able to feel what it is to see the Earth from that perspective. Next tier up is space industries. This is where we have satellites. This is orbital space. And we have developed this very well. We've got it down how to launch satellites and how to use them. Anyone here used a GPS to get here? Raise some hands? Yeah? All right, well, that's 3 satellites just to triangulate your position to get you here. So we're constantly using these in our day-to-day life, and yet the amount of people who in here, I mean, if anyone is an astronaut, please let yourself be known, because it would be really cool. But the amount of people in here who have even ever seen a satellite is extremely small. And the fact is that it is a huge industry and it is a huge part of our life, but it's very disconnected from us because we're missing the 2 tiers in between, right? And then finally, the tip of it is it's basically the rest of the universe. So after orbital space, we have everything else. And the furthest we've gotten so far, which was a very large feat, was Pluto, New Horizons, and it keeps going. And the way that we got half a metric ton that far into space is we made it as light as possible. We got the largest rockets we had. We put as much thrust as we could. We calculated everything we possibly could, aimed, launched, and prayed. And that was as much as we could do for 9 years, right? And the fact is, the reason we are so outstretched to go past our orbital space is because we only found a trick to get to space industries. The other 2 tiers are extremely anemic in this pyramid. And so we need to develop these 2 tiers on a permanent level, the same way that we've developed the space industry tier, to be able to go further in and to be able to step up to that. So, just because this is going to be a large idea to wrap your head around, what exactly is a space scraper? Without further ado, they are hanging habitats on a suborbital state ring. They would be able to maintain 250,000 inhabitants in them, and they would be up to 50 miles up. So they will never go into space. They're space scrapers, the same way that skyscrapers never go into the sky, right? And you are allowed to think I'm crazy, but by the end of this, either you will think I'm not, or I will have dragged you along with me. So, bear with me. So, many questions occur. First one is, why would we do this? So, let's start with medicine and research and development. So this is one of the key features that the ISS is doing right now. This not only would we still have certain environments of space that we can take advantage of. You know, the atmosphere of Earth doesn't end in a line completely. So there are certain features that if we have, I'll go over how, but if we have a platform by which we can do 250,000 people's work of research and development, we're going to get higher and higher and be able to deal with these environments of space and the radiation of space. That's one of the problems we have. Another aspect is space tourism and transportation. There is a way of launching into space from the ring that is suborbital. And I mean, I'm not sure where you guys went for your senior class trip. I went to Italy. It was really cool, but space would have been cooler. So hopefully that will actually be a possibility for future generations. As a stepping stone, this is what I'm talking about, the pyramid of progress into space. If we can create a stable and sturdy platform to be able to go into space, we'll get further. And finally, new forms of astrobiology and non-terrestrial living. I'm not sure how many gardeners we have in the room, but if you've ever experienced just planting one seed in fertile soil, and you follow the instructions and you water it a little bit and make sure it has light, and all of a sudden, magically, a sprout comes up and it starts growing starts evolving this whole story of the plant that's happening. And you feel like you've done everything, but honestly, you just gave it a little water and fertile soil. And so if we can, the same way that we realize that we need to give it water and light, we can also start realizing other factors that plants and animals would need to live in a more artificial environment by the means that we've created it. So again, the higher we go into space and the more solid we are in our foundation, the better we can live further and further in there. Now, where on Earth or off Earth would this be? At this point, we have to bring up that we're talking about a very large infrastructure project, okay? Extremely large. And so I'm not sure if anyone's ever tried to get a building permit in the city of Seattle, or just talk to your homeowners association to change the color of your house, or just dig a hole deep enough and not having to call the electric company and the gas company. These are all aspects that when you're talking about a very large scale project, and we're talking 20,000 kilometers large, okay? That's a lot of homeowners associations that you would have to deal with. And so, to avoid all of it, we just thought Antarctica is a great idea. It would be precisely around the 61st degree in latitude. So that's about 20,000 kilometers. It would be able to support about 1 billion kilograms, and it wouldn't interfere, first of all, with political life and normal life in so many different countries that it would encompass otherwise, as well as the environmental aspects are greatly reduced when the environment is greatly reduced. Right, now the big question. How? So we're going to start with very broad brushstrokes here. We're going to get a very impressionistic view of this, and hopefully we'll get closer and closer onto what it actually looks like. But first, let's just get a broad view. It starts, this is the deployed ring. So this is already off the surface of the Earth. You have to imagine that if we're staying within the atmosphere, if Earth is the size of a peach, the atmosphere is the fuzz on a peach. So it's not that far in comparison to for example, orbital space, right? And the way that we have it set up, if we have a cross section, which means if we cut this ring and we look straight down the tube, let's look at the forces that are being applied to this ring. First one is obviously gravity. This one, Yeah, that's the long return flight. And then we have the stay. The stay is connected to the continent of Antarctica. But basically think this isn't pulling with gravity. It's not pulling down, it's pulling towards the pole. And finally, the secret sauce here is a centripetal force. A centripetal force is basically that's centripetal force. What pulls out when something is moving. So here we reveal the next little tier into it is we actually have two rings. I've been saying a ring, but it's actually two. One is moving, one is staying still, and they are magnetically attached, which means the moving ring is the one causing the centripetal force. The static one is the one connected to the stay to Antarctica, as well as to the space rings. And the fact that they're magnetically connected means that they're not having friction, but they're both taking advantage of the forces of the other one. All right? So looking back onto our planet here, we actually have two rings. One is moving very fast and pulling outward from the center of the ring. That's another thing to consider. It's from the center of the ring, which would be about here. And the planet is trying to pull inward to the center of the planet. Alright? And then the stays are pulling towards the pole. So these are the three forces, very simply, that allow for this to stay up. Talking about the stays real quick. So on the ring side, they have a certain design that spreads out their force and points of contact for two reasons. First of all, because you want as many points of contact as possible to spread out this force along the ring. It's 20,000 kilometers. And then on the bottom, and also for redundancy, in case a stay from any point were to break or there to be any problem, there's already another stay that is taking care of that surface of the ring. And on the other side, on the Earth side, it would be spread out to be able to allow for air traffic, marine traffic, and of course, natural inhabitants of Antarctica, whales, krill, birds of scientists, whatever goes to Antarctica on a regular basis. And even still, we have to look a bit closer to what this is looking like. So for wrapping around the Earth, soon you'll see the image is proper on the projection. You'll slowly see the atmosphere coming in, and you see a shade coming up, which is the ring. And this is still within the Earth's atmosphere. The shadow that we have on the background, that is just to show that it's up. We have the stays here, and the ring is this, right? And the ring is actually only 1.5 feet in diameter. So it's not that large in dimension. Even in the video, we had to augment the parts about 1,000 times for you to see it just in the video. The fact is that if you were about 90 miles away from this ring, if you're on the planet and you're looking up at it, it would have no more effects on your eye than looking at a spider web from 3 feet away. Right? So it doesn't actually take up that much space. It's just very long. And to this point, I always kind of think of like some Chilean woman just looking at her kitchen window. What is that? I'm not going. In terms of the construction of the ring, so we would build it underwater off the coast of Antarctica. Underwater to allow for icebergs to be able to move the way they move, as well as marine traffic. And also, this just allows for a lot of testing, and it's as least invasive as possible that way. So to pull it up, we have the same three forces. We have gravity, the stay which is pulling towards the pole, and then we have the centripetal force which is pulling again. This is a cross section, so we're looking at a slice of the ring. Right? We're looking down the tube. And so if this is a cross section, remember that the center of the ring is in this direction, that way. Right? And so the centripetal force and the stay, when you tighten those, when you make those forces larger, the addition of those vectors are pointing upward, and it pulls the ring up. Oh, and this is why, in case anyone was wondering, this is why we're the Atlantis Project. Is we would build this futuristic society underwater and then majestically bring it up. So that's in case anyone was curious about that. And still, to have another video to express a little bit better how we're bringing the ring up. Let's just play this real quick. So here we have force of gravity, the centripetal force, and the state force. And notice that the higher we go, the centripetal force and the state force has to get larger, even though the force of gravity is actually getting smaller the higher we go. This is due to the angle between them. So the wider this angle gets and the more equal they become, the harder they have to pull to counter gravity, right? And then there comes the point where the state starts pulling downward, helping gravity. So there is a limit, and the limit is actually space. So this will forever be a space scraper. This will never go into orbital space. And so that's how that works. In terms of transportation. Now, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the ideas of space elevators, but basically they are, the idea is to create an elevator, a structure that can take payloads all the way to orbital space. Unfortunately for them, that's really high up. Fortunately for us, in their endeavors to try and solve their many problems, they've solved ours very well. So, a few things to consider in terms of elevators is that we are not going through as many different layers of the atmosphere as an elevator that is trying to go into orbital space. We're also not going as high up, so there's a length problem that's solved. And another aspect is that this cable here is actually hanging from the ring down, whereas space elevators would have to be supported from the ground up. So that are a few key differences between transportation to the ring and an actual elevator that I think probably has quite a few more decades to develop in terms of material science. But they have solved very beautifully our own issues. In terms of transportation within the ring, we would have high-speed transportation that would allow for people to go from spacecraper to spacecraper. And I mean, these spacecrapers don't have to look like M&Ms and Tic Tacs, but these are just, representations of them. But the main idea is that, I mean, if however long it took you to get to this gallery tonight, imagine that you can go from the gallery back home without the traffic, without the stoplights, without the guy cutting you off, and you go at 200 miles per hour, straight line. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't take you that long to get home. That is the main idea with a high-speed communication transportation within the ring, is that if we want a society and a community that's going to be able to develop cultural aspects and aspects of community, we're going to need high-speed transportation within it. And there's that explanation. Alright, so now that you have all been introduced to a few basic concepts of how this is maintained up and what it is, let's look at a more practical example of how this would work. So this is Alex and Sam, and they live in Philadelphia and want to go up to the spacecraters. So what they do is they catch a plane all the way down to Antarctica to a spaceport. And from the spaceport, take an elevator, takes down their luggage and their happy faces, all the way up to a high-speed form of transportation. And from there, they go to a research hotel where they'll be staying for a little bit. There, Sam takes advantage of a little light pollution to look deeper into space, which is her field of expertise. And Alex is finalizing some experiments that he'll eventually launch into orbit. Also, within the ring, while they're there, since there's a large community of scientists, they're going to be going to conferences and seminars around the ring. They're going to have plenty of restaurants and cultural events. Remember that you can have different tourist aspects of this. So If you think of Vail, Colorado as a ski town, and you've ever been there, they have so many restaurants and spas and galleries and so many things happening. And this is more what you have to imagine as a community. This is a kind of out there tourist destination. As well as there's the aspect of they can eventually just buy their own spot, their own floor space within the ring, either for their own research or create an Airbnb or whatever it is that they want to do. But the fact is, there you go. Then before they leave, they go take a little trip into orbital space, and here I'll explain. It's not actually how the whimsical little cartoon would depict it. Would it be through rockets? The way you would be launched into space is you would be moved around the ring until you reach escape velocity, and then you're released. So if you can think of like David and Goliath, and you're just kind of, this is highly calculated and extremely safe by the time we put people on this. This is the main idea, is that you just speed up and then you're released. And so finally, after they finished all the research, they go back home, they tell all their friends and family what a great time they had, and they came back the same way they go back the same way they came. And so now that you all are experts on space scrapers and that sort of thing, I actually want to, for my own knowledge, I have a quick survey. Which do you think would be the most profitable business on the ring? So just show of hands, but we'll go through them first and then I'll go through them again. So A would be medicine, research and development. B, tourist destination. C, launch into orbit. D, high-rise real estate. Or E, other, if you think that I forgot something. All right? So how many people think it would be A? And as B, tourist destination. C, launch into orbit. Oh, it's pretty evenly distributed. D, high-rise real estate. And anyone had other really great ideas that I missed? Okay, during the Q&A session, I hope you can mention them. But yeah, that was actually pretty evenly distributed, except for E. That's interesting. I honestly thought that research and development would be the biggest one, but apparently not. Now, for as great as all this daydream has been, and this message isn't going to come up, of course not on the screen, but it says on the top there, it says, we're not alone. And that's because there are a lot of technological advances, a lot of research being done, and a lot of things that go over a lot of the different topics that I've been covering today. There are so many different pieces of the puzzle here that I've just skimmed over, because if not, we're not going to have much time left. But, for example, the longest pipeline in the world right now, it's about 2,500 miles, more or less. It's the Druzhba pipeline going across all the Soviet countries. And the largest underwater one is 746 miles, thank you very much for that note there. And it's going from Norway to the southern UK Isles. So they're already, pipelines are pretty advanced technology for as much as we do them. And the fact that there are things already being developed is wonderful for us. In terms of levitation, when I'm talking about the moving ring is levitated and it's speeding up, right? Maglev trains, that's a lot of technology that has already been resolved for us. And this has been successful for years now. Extremely successful. Remember that because we're still within Earth's atmosphere, we still have the pull of gravity, and so there are many aspects that we can take advantage of this directly. In terms of high-speed transportation, the Hyperloop. Has anyone read the white paper on the Hyperloop? It's very interesting. Within the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, he highly suggests someone to invent teletransportation. So, and until then, in that stead, he suggests this very high-tech way of moving. And right now, SpaceX is investigating in this, and it really is very, very interesting. So this is a type of technology that would be for the transportation within the ring. I haven't even gone into manufacturing and maintenance, but these are all images from the J. Kumar lab of the University of Pennsylvania. And they investigate different behaviors in drones and bots. So swarm activity, or being able to program a drone in a way that if something falls out of the scheme, they can resolve it immediately. And so the fact that we're developing so many aspects of AI basically at this point, almost, is something that we should take advantage of, especially if we're going to build something 20,000 kilometers around. In terms of environmental systems, ISS, enough said. I mean, we're still going to be within the atmosphere where we have certain levels of oxygen outside that you can make more concentrated for the environments, for the habitats. There's still gravity where we are, and there's still a certain amount of pressure. So the fact that there have been successfully 6 to 10 astronauts constantly living in the ISS already way resolved any aspect that we would have in terms of environmental systems, and they've done it beautifully. Another aspect is, words escaping me now, but this is called power by light, and it's beaming energy, right? So you wouldn't have wires. It's still, this is a natural product that's being sold, but the technology of it is still being developed. And these are different aspects that would resolve certain power necessities during different requirements of ring. And then finally, here we have carbon fiber structures from the University of Stuttgart in Germany. And carbon fiber structures are becoming more and more manufactured and easier to manufacture and in larger quantities. So this is the type of material that we're looking at when we're talking about the states. So at the end of the day, we do have a lot of the technology that's capable of doing what we're talking about, and we do have the will to do it, the math to do it. The main hiccup on the road is the magnitude at which we would have to do it. And so there are many people that even after everything's explained, even after all their doubts are resolved, it's like, but it's so big. And it is. It is large. It is a very large undertaking. But the fact is, you just have to have the vision to be able to look at it. Here, the sky's the limit. That's pun intended, because once the sky's done, we're done. So that's it. But the one thing that a friend of mine was mentioning the other day is that these are all drawings from Leonardo da Vinci's trying to fly. And what she mentioned was that these are actually drawings from other people's ideas that he was just collecting and putting together. And he wasn't extremely successful, let's say, flying, but it's interesting that this idea of bringing together knowledge from so many different areas and taking other people's successes and being able to build upon that, this is what's going to be able to bring the technology forward. So if you kind of release your own imagination, and you imagine that this is possible, and you imagine that you can go up there, how would you build your own space scraper? What would it look like? And so, would you have a glass ceiling? Would you have a glass floor? What shape would it have? What color would it have? Would you try and keep up with the Joneses? The last idea that I want to leave with you guys is that going back to Earth, and in fact back in time, let's say that it's 1903, and you're walking on the beach, and you hear seagulls, and it's such a nice afternoon, and just kind of very randomly, there are these two very stressed fellows who are bringing up and down this kind of, this contraption up and down a sand dune. It's like this tangle of rope and cloth and string, and what would you do if you see that happening? Would you ask what they're doing? And if they answered that they were trying to make it fly, would you help them push? The Atlantis Project strives to create a permanent structure between the limits of Earth and space. The technology available today is almost capable of doing this. So we address the physical and economic problems facing to build it. The reason to do it can be from research and development to high-rise real estate to launching into orbit. But at the end of the day, it's not an end in itself, it's a means to an end, which is basically to bring space closer and to push the limitations of space further. So for whoever would have helped the Wright brothers push back in 1903, I suggest you visit spacefreedom.com. Thank you. I think now we have a Q&A.
I have so many questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, let me move. Although mine doesn't look like
Sorry, guys. Couldn't plan this much. I'm also down here, but you guys didn't realize this. Also,
thank you very much. I know that is a big pill to swallow. That's a lot of information and a lot of things to wrap your head around. I wrote a few questions, and I promise I'll take questions from the audience, but I always like to get mine first. But I thought a lot about environmentalism, and I thought about global warming, and I thought about if this is something that gets built out of necessity or if something gets built out of optimism. I mean, I don't know if that's something that you think about, but like, do we wait until it's like we have to build this, or do you think we're just getting excited about it?
Okay, I'll take this one.
Sure.
So the problems that we face on Earth with global warming, in a sense, represent an opportunity to finance this project. If you send enough people up to the edge of space and give them an opportunity to look back on the planet and sort of watch the clouds floating by and appreciate how beautiful it is, when they come back, they're going to be a little bit different. You're going to change their minds. And if you're doing this as a tourist thing for millions and millions of people, over time you're going to change the entire fabric of the society. More and more people are going to be making decisions or voting for leaders that are more interested in protecting and preserving our own planet. And if you could, thinking like a businessman, sell carbon credits for that kind of measurable perceptual change in our society, you could probably make a fortune just on the carbon credits alone. So they could finance the ring theoretically with just that kind of economics. So we're building this to change the way we think about the planet, to save the planet, to save ourselves from having to build walls to prevent the ocean from coming and taking over the land, for example. So that's a kind of an idea where you can have a real significant impact on the planet, and you don't have to wait until the planet's destroyed to start building something like that to get off the planet.
I would like to add to that as well that I was talking a lot about research and development outwards into space, but the fact is that having a stayed position so high in the atmosphere that's constant, and also being able to hold so many researchers can also look downward from a new perspective at the problem that we're facing on Earth, and ways, for example, of imitating certain aspects of the atmosphere that we may be able to resolve certain problems that way. Again, all based on research and development, but a new viewpoint can only be beneficial towards the environment, especially when you're talking about global warming.
Thank you. I've got one more question, then the audience. Sorry. I think of the lifespan. I think that every building that we've ever made, every structure that we've ever made has a lifespan. It's sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 100 years. I think about what happens when this thing is hit by a meteorite. I think about like what's the what do you do? I mean, it doesn't stay there forever.
Well, so we actually I wrote a paper on some of this, and part of my paper actually covers the fun thing about what you would do if you're making a Hollywood movie about this thing, and like actually fun with it.
We'll stay away from speakers, and we'll turn up Phil's. We turn mine down.
It's working. It's working now.
A little bit louder. A little bit louder.
It's working now.
A little bit louder.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we have had some fun about natural disasters and things that could go wrong. But we know that Hollywood one day would like to make a movie about this and have some fun with it. So we have been giving some thought to that. There's a lot of minor types of problems that we've thought through and figured out solutions. So obviously, orbital debris is a major problem for space elevators in general. We're not building a space elevator, building something lower down. And because of the rarefied atmosphere, stuff doesn't stay in orbit, and so things don't generally pass multiple times by. Like the space station, for example, worries about because of orbital debris hitting it and breaking the hole or hitting an astronaut. It's not that often, but it's a serious risk. But in the atmosphere, that doesn't happen. Things come through once in a while, but not that often. Now, if you want to think big, like what if that big, huge asteroid comes along and takes us out? So the ring can actually be moved. So if you're aware of an asteroid coming in, you can actually get out of the way. But if suppose it was really big, and my son had a really good idea about this one. So you remember there's a moving ring inside? And he said, well, imagine that moving ring, it's actually moving quite fast. Imagine you could actually separate the stationary ring out for a moment as the asteroid came in. It would be like a giant bandsaw, and the asteroid would actually go right through it and get sliced in two. And when you actually look at the map, it's actually not speeding the thing, it actually theoretically slice it, an asteroid map. So I'm encouraging some scientists out there who wants to have some fun with the map, to go and see if it's really true that we could cut an asteroid in half without actually falling out of the sky. Because I'm curious too. But that's the kind of thing, we do think about these things a lot, and we have a lot of fun with these ideas. So, but we're not too concerned, we work a lot of them, and we're still working, but it's a fun area to think about.
Somebody stole. No hospital. Look at our operations. You're still now.
Let's just chill out for a second. I think that there's probably a few people out there that have questions, and I'm just going to randomly pick people. This gentleman in the plaid.
Hi, so you guys mentioned that you worked out some of the math. I'm curious, like, how far you've gone with that. So there are 2 parts. One is how far you've gone with the math, what's left to work out, or what have you really solidified down. When it comes to things like centrifugal force versus gravity versus, the tension of the core. And then the other one.
The gentleman in the virtual reality goggles, would you please join us? Thank you. Okay, we got the first question. The second question.
Related to that, which was, what's the largest technology? Because you talked about how a lot of technology necessary to accomplish this has been developed. But you talked about a lot of the technology has been developed. So I'm curious, what are the largest things that would need to be developed for this to work?
I'm going to reiterate your question just for our sound engineer. Well, the question is, I guess, what's left on the technical side? And what haven't you solved? What's left to solve? What have you solved? What's left to solve? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so there were 2 questions. One is, have you done math on this, and how far along are we? And yes, we have done math and put this into a Java program. I actually created one of the videos you saw with the 3 forces and the ring coming off the ground. So that's all based on a Java program that's doing some pretty advanced math, at least as advanced as I know. I am looking for mathematicians to help me get this math even better. There's a few assumptions in there, so if any mathematicians want to approach me afterwards, that'd be great. I forgot a lot in school, it's kind of bad. But we're up at we're doing hyperbolic cosines and sines and that kind of math at this point, and we need to go even further. So we're doing pretty advanced math already. So as for the question of where are we in terms of our, what are the interesting technical problems that are really perplexing. So there's a couple that are really fun. One is the states themselves. So we know that if we use today's strongest materials like carbon fiber, that we can get it so high. And we've got some ideas of how to get it a little bit higher still. But if we could get the materials to get stronger still, we can go even higher. And so we're working on that. Now we know we don't need materials as strong as they need for the space elevator that has a massive geosynchronous orbit. That's using materials that are like 100 times as strong as carbon fiber. We know that with like 3 or 4 times as strong as carbon fiber, we can probably do everything we want to do. So we want to see that improved. And we're expecting that to happen. And the other area we want to improve on is our kind of our maglev technology. So we really want to work out the operational cost of running maglevs at these speeds and see how much per person living on this ring is going to cost to pay your electricity bill. We think it's going to be reasonable, but we don't want people to go broke living up there. So we want to figure out that and see if we can come up with a low enough friction system to make sure the bills are payable. Economically, that makes sense. So that kind of the cost and engineering problem still exists.
So I have a quick question, then I'll be back, promise. Is this a perpetual motion machine once it's in orbit? Does it require fuel? Is it solar powered like the maglev? Does it require energy to keep it going?
Sure, I'll
I put 2 mics now.
How do you get that pitch?
Okay, one's really short. Is it working
No,
now?
no, it's not.
Right.
Okay, you can answer that.
So professional. I think we're 2.
Talk pretty loud.
Oh,
There we
here.
go. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Didn't mean to be sarcastic. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so this is not a perpetual motion machine. You do need certain amounts of energy just to create the magnetic field that you need to levitate it and have it spin through. And even though there isn't static and kinetic friction that's happening, there are other drag forces and frictional forces that do have an effect. Now they are they are extremely reduced, but there is still a certain amount of energy that you have to keep putting in every once in a while. On the other hand, because there are such small frictional forces, the energy that you need to keep it going is a lot less than the energy that you originally need to get it going.
What is that fuel source?
Electric. Well, there are a few different ideas. For example, if you were to have solar panels all throughout the ring, a meter wide or a meter squared, solar panels, and you start charging this up in Antarctica's summer, it would take you about a month and a half to be able to have enough energy that you've sped up the ring to the right velocity for it to start pulling up. There are other aspects, for example, taking advantage of the high winds in Antarctica to be able to take advantage of that. Then there are winds as you go higher up that you can take advantage of. There are many different ways to fuel this. If you need it all at once, it would be a large amount of energy, but fortunately you can build up to it. And that is one of the advantages of the ring, is that you don't have to go all the way to the highest limits from the beginning. You can go as the technology is developed further and further. For example, right now we would need carbon nanotubes to get all the way up, but carbon fiber tubes would allow us to get up to a certain level.
Okay, thank you. There's 2 people very far back first. That's right. You, thank you.
Hello. So you're clearly like way smarter than and I'm totally, I love science fiction. If you haven't ever read The Point Being Convected by Ray Bradbury, do it. It's like 15 pages long. It's about spectrum. We know that it was amassed by fiction authors 7 years ago. It's true now, what you said. So you're having a whole humanity on this project. So I'm curious what science fiction speculative authors do to express the results of this project so that we get it. Because it's amazing. What do we want to read the book? What book do you want written about this?
I'm going to try to do a very what author would you employ to write a science fiction novel that is based around space scrapers?
I have a perfect answer because we've already recruited one. Her name is Caitlin Kelly, and she's already started to develop ideas for a science fiction short story. Originally, just when I started telling her about it, and so it is interesting that the science part of space scrapers and bringing the ring up and creating, this stayed environment that is scientifically and technologically possible just gives way for everything else, such as what architecture will you create if you don't have to build from the ground up, or what stories can you imagine happening in this ring? And so each person, regardless of whatever educational background they have, everyone has huge amounts of intelligence in different fields. And this is what we're hoping to bring together precisely, is these different types of intelligence and create a world with it. So this is supposed to be a community. It's not just an outpost. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because that has already happened, that people feel inspired to start writing stories about what it would be like to live in a space scraper and what would happen there. So thank you.
Great. Down front, because
Hi. I'm wondering, since you're talking about it as a community, like who's in charge and who has sovereignty and who's governing all of that space?
who's in charge of the ring? Is it international? The one's full. Is there another one? But is it a corporation? Is it like a Tesla of space? Is it ISS? Is it?
Well, we are a research project, so we are still open to different ideas. For right now, we would think that each habitat would end up being its own, basically, sovereign state, in the sense that that's, as long as you abide by certain rules, and I guess that the laws would have to be dictated within the ring differently, just for the fact that there are physical aspects that you have to abide by, because it affects directly everyone else. But they're again inviting many different intelligences, and
I got some more questions for myself.
So, I actually think this is a really great question. And when I think about this, you think about taking the laws today and trying to apply them in this new environment. You're going to be like, this is a ridiculous law, and you're going to be throwing it at me. You're going, this is another ridiculous law. Let's throw that out as well. And before long, you're going to have thrown out so many existing legacy laws that we have in our current world that you'll be saying, we should just write a bunch of new laws that really work. And I think this creates an opportunity for a place to exist where people can explore writing new laws and see how they work, and not having to, live with the history of a lot of regulatory red tape to get people living with on Earth. So, from a point of view of developing new businesses and engineering and trying to ideas, this is great.
Why just turn off the red timer?
She's like some other regulation.
Laws should be thrown out.
That's right.
We're going to go to the blue shirt, then we'll go.
Yeah.
So you're proposing governance by the largest HOA ever.
Yes. No. It would have to be seen. At this point, we haven't hired the janitors either. So there are some aspects that we need to develop once we have completely nailed down the safety and security of living beings at 8 kilometers up. From there, I think we'll develop as it comes along, as it progresses.
That's perfect.
In front here.
I was just going to ask, where in the world, I guess, the funding or the government backing whatever we need to do to get people to agree on things.
In a perfect world,
Yeah.
he writes a check for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So another good question. We thought of three kind of key ways of doing it. One of them was, disruptive industry. So if you think back to Napoleon, he had some spoons made. I bet you can't guess what he had them made out of. He wanted to make some precious spoons. He made them out of aluminum because that was one of the most precious materials around at the time. He wanted to show off. And today we make everything out of aluminum. We make cans out of aluminum. So imagine, you were to go out to space and you start mining asteroids, and suddenly platinum became as ubiquitous as aluminum is today. And you go to the car dealer and you buy a platinum car. You're like, that's going to be crazy idea today. Just like an aluminum spoon is probably crazy for Napoleon. But if we can change something by going into space and getting these kinds of minerals and bringing it to Earth and making them cheap, that's a very disruptive thing to do to the planet and its economy. And you can be that disruptive to the planet's economy, you can make cash flow and fund a project like this. I also said, like before, you can fund it with changing people's perceptions about the world and having the planet be taken care of better as a result. That's an indirect way of funding this. But a very interesting way of funding it is the same way skyscrapers are funded today. That people pay for real estate that's really high off the ground for the silliest of reasons. It's employee retention. So if you study the problem of why skyscrapers are built and what finances them, they're literally built because the floor space retains employees and it's expensive to get new employees if they keep leaving. So that's why skyscrapers are actually built, to retain employees. And so floor space that's prestigious is actually worth a lot of money. You can sell it. So we figured out, if we sold our floor space at the same price as skyscraper floor spaces, if you lease that, you can make it $10 billion or $9 billion a year just in leasing the floor space. So that's a source of revenue to help fund the project.
I would also like to add to that because economy is obviously going to be very important in this project in the sense that you can have a great idea, but unless you have some sort of large amounts of money coming in, it's not going to be able to get off the ground. So more than working on who's going to pay it from the beginning, it's also important to see, okay, how many inhabitants would be able to live there, and work with the budget of each inhabitant down into, okay, this is the amount of money that we would be able to spend. So figure it out. You have to figure out a way that is going to be economically viable and safe for people to be able to then be able to buy floor space. So that's another thing I wanted to add.
The waving hand in the way back. Okay, you have to talk really loud though, so we can't hear you.
Okay, so I guess it's yes, we have the elevator that goes up this way. It spins pretty quick. Is there a balcony or something that's going to happen? It's so very bad.
Yeah.
So the question about docking procedures from Earth to the ring.
One thing that a lot of people sometimes, because it's such a huge idea to encompass, is that there is a moving ring, but the habitats and everything that's connected to the ring is on the static ring, is on the one that stays still. So yes, there's going to be a dock, there's going to be something that, like a platform, as if it were the next floor. But this is because it's all on the non-moving ring. So the habitats aren't the ones that are moving. It's just one thin piece of the pipe that is moving all the time. Everything else stays still. So it would be just kind of like an elevator here. Because this floor isn't moving, the elevator comes up and the doors open and you can just walk right out.
The guy pointing to himself. Sorry.
Dream and reality. So maybe 15 years ago, going to Mars was a dream. Today it feels like a reality. So today's presentation, at the beginning it was like this dream I never knew I wanted. At the end of it, it does feel like a reality. So my question to you is, how do you make people make that reality. That is this like wonderful scientific sci-fi idea that we can all disagree about, or something that we can actually move economics, politics toward achieving.
How do you change people's opinions and get them to know about your project?
All right, so that's another great question. And it brings me back to the time around, I think it was like 1910 or so. So you had these investors, and they had, I guess, a couple choices. They could have taken their money and listened to the Wright brothers, and they could have built this airplane that carried 400 people and landed in cities and flew across the ocean. Or they could have taken the money and they could have built a big ship that carried even more passengers across the Atlantic Ocean and dodged icebergs. And they were both equally big projects, and they chose to go with the one that went across the ocean and dodged icebergs. And it failed. It actually sunk people kind of here. But from our point of view, the project where we would have built the airplane that could carry 400 people and fly across the ocean and land in cities was actually the more sane project in the long term. So the question is, how do you get an investor to think that far ahead? And it really comes down to just having lots of people who they trust tell them, it's okay, trust them, it'll work. And that comes down to a lot of math and a lot of arguments and debates about how it should be done, and people just eventually accept it from an engineering perspective. But you can see how we should have built the airplane, we shouldn't have built the ship. And if we could have. And that's what we should have done.
I just want to add, I told you that I would make you as crazy as I am.
Feeling crazy. We're going to do 3 more questions, and then I hope that everyone sticks around and talks and socializes and talks amongst yourself. But we're going to do this woman in a scarf, and then the light blue shirt, and then behind the last row. I think I got it. Yes, you.
So this sounds pretty feasible. Probably far before peace will ever happen on humanity. And sitting here the whole time, I've just thought of refugees. And has it ever been made into a presentation to consider it as a humanitarian place, a safe place? Safe.
The question is the ring a place for refugees or people that are...
Displacement.
I think that's in displacement, I think there's an environmental displacement that we're all going to have at some point. But I'll not answer the question.
All right, so I guess, some of the first refugees you could say were guys in the Mayflower, people that left Europe. I don't know my history that well, but I know they left Europe for a reason. And they took a bit of a chance and traveled to America and settled it. Now, I think this kind of project is similar. Now, obviously, just going to the habitat of the ring isn't getting that far away from everything, but it is a step forward. And if you were, willing to do the kind of job that you've done on the ring, like I said, lead janitors, right? So if you're going to be a refugee and you can take a job up there, I think you can get up there and find some work, and it would be another place to go. But more importantly, this is a place for anybody on Earth to step away from the planet altogether and start thinking about maybe further destinations, so bases that are on the moon, eventually Mars, and maybe around asteroids, and one day out of the planet. So as we, as a race, grow and have a stepping stone to get away from get out of our own gravity well, we're going to see lots of places for people to go, and refugees will have lots of choice.
Well, you're just promoting it as a commodity. So much in that. I mean, it is to the political world. Not that the world is together.
2 more. The woman in the back, she's ever getting higher. Yes.
What is your projection for the severity of the environmental impact on planet Earth? Because I know that it's just around Antarctica, but they say that things like windmills affect flight patterns of birds. So don't you think that drilling into the planet will affect the migratory patterns of sea life and whales? Like, don't you think it will have a drastic impact on the planet?
Do the anchor lines that attach this to Earth have an environmental impact? I don't know how many anchor lines we're talking about. Are there thousands or hundreds? But the environmental impact on the lines that attach it?
Right, sure. So the environmental impacts are going to have to be a lot more studied. But basically, the whole concept is to be as least invasive as possible. So these stays would be spaced out in a way that would allow for large whales, for large migrations, marine life, and I'm not quite sure how many birds that fly go to Antarctica, but not many, I don't think. But actually, building in Antarctica to begin with is to make sure that we're not disrupting different environmental aspects than if you're going to the Amazon rainforest, for example. So that's one side. The other side is that these stays, because for as much as we want all these forces to be perfectly exactly the same, and we want everything in the ring to be perfectly balanced, to create this balance, we would already have to imagine that the stays are going to be differently spaced, depending on either wind currents or what's going to happen on the ground. So if there is like a large migration that is happening right in the middle where a stay is, then it would have to be moved, basically. So there is a consciousness to when you're building this. You have to be as least invasive as possible. This is also why we build underwater, to allow for everything to be as it was before we got there.
Is there a distance between each stay? Do you know that? Is it 100 miles? Is it 10 miles? Is it 1,000 miles?
So it would be it wouldn't be hundreds of miles, but it would again depend on the environment or the necessity of each stay. For example, if there happen to be more earthquakes in an area and you want more redundancy, you would have a closer space. Or if you need more space or there isn't so much need for redundancy, or maybe there's both. You need a large space in between at the bottom, but you still need a certain amount of stays at the top. So you make that stay thicker and it ports out further on the ring. So this all depends on the necessities of what the environment is. So even though we want it as perfectly symmetrical as possible, to create that symmetry and to create that balance, we're going to have to adapt what's on the ground to begin with.
Okay. All right, last question, and then we're going to wrap up. Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess I would think maybe like one really good power source would be solar if you're that high up. And so I'm just curious if it is built around Antarctica. And I know like if you were to live in Antarctica, it's going to be darkness for like part of the year, daylight for part of the year. Would there be a possibility to maybe actually like put it in a different location and use like a different force other than centrifugal force, maybe some sort of magnetic inertia or something like that?
Okay, so I'll repeat your question a bit. So I think you're basically saying that we can talk about solar power in the ring, and that'd be great in the summer, but what's the source of power when the Earth turns around and it's dark in Antarctica? So basically you're asking, you want to understand the power of the dark side.
Yeah, that or if there's like an alternate location, South Pacific or something like that.
Right, so one idea we had, there's a lot of load balancing ideas where solar power is used to provide power, and then at night, other sources of power are used, like hydroelectric dams, so you can be off in the day and use that power at night. Or wind farms, for another example. So one of the ideas we had for that was, everyone's heard about how strong the winds are in Antarctica. You've seen videos, I'm sure. And the reason for this is that the Antarctic ice cap cools the air, and the air flows off the coast of Antarctica like a river. And as it gets close to the shore, those mountains, it gets a channel, and it picks up incredible speed. So you actually get the highest speed winds on the planet at the coast of Antarctica. These are called Cadillac winds. They're immense. And if you put a wind farm on the coast of Antarctica, you would actually get a ton of power out of those winds. So at nighttime, these winds are actually stronger. In the winter, I should say, summer for us. Who knows? These are stronger winds, and they provide a great source of power to augment the lack of solar power we're getting on the solar cells. So that's a great example of it. Another benefit of this is actually that if you're actually slowing down the air flowing off Antarctica, you're going to get a little bit of extra insulation and keep it cooler, which might actually help it from prevent from melting. So it can provide a small benefit there.
Thank you, Phil Swan, and thank you, Shay-na. That gives us a lot to think about.